Well, hello, everyone. It's John Lockland here. I'm the director of Forum for Democracy International. Welcome to this week's forum. I'm delighted to welcome our co-host Peter Lavelle from Moscow. Jeremy Nell will be joining us very shortly. And our two main guests for today, Daniel McAdams from the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity in Texas, and Catherine Austin Fitz from the Solari Report based in the Netherlands. Daniel, I've been following your ups and downs as the campaign took its course, and then as the Trump victory was announced, and then as the various nominations started to come in, and Daniel, I never thought I'd pronounce this sentence, but I feel your pain. You made a huge effort to be neutral. I think it's fair to say that you didn't want Kamala Harris to win, but equally you were very reserved about Trump, and you kept your distance. And then there was a first moment when you were relatively enthusiastic, and then more recently you were basically trying to save the furniture. What's your assessment now that all the nominations have come in, the appointments?
Yeah, I guess it's the most public nervous breakdown on record. It was. And, I did want Trump to win because I thought it couldn't get any worse under Kamala Harris. We were careening toward war. And at least Trump ran on the idea of, I don't want to start new wars. I want to stop the wars. And he still says that. But you're absolutely right. It was a lot of highs and a lot of lows. His foreign policy and national security picks, I would have a hard time figuring out worse picks than he's made. I don't understand what he has in mind. I don't understand what he's trying to do. I don't understand how much influence the people around him have. My guess is quite a bit. But the people like Mike Waltz as his national security advisor, that's a position that doesn't require Senate approval. So that's an automatic for him. He could have picked anyone. He could have picked someone with some serious national security experience that could have helped guide him. The same is true for his Secretary of Defense, who, although he was in the military, he was in a very controversial unit when he was in Iraq that was accused, probably rightly so, of committing some serious war crimes against civilians in Iraq. Very, very little. I mean, you want your secretary. I mean, the Defense Department is the largest, I think, employer in the U.S. government. You want to have someone there that's at least CEO caliber. Turns out he's a commentator on Fox News. You can go down the line to the sub. I thought at least maybe the sub and sub level appointments might be good. But John, I'm sure you're familiar with a charlatan by the name of Sebastian Gorka, who I think sells hemorrhoid cream or something.
Dr. Gorka, yes.
Dr.
Actually, I'm familiar with him largely because not so long ago, I don't know, a year and a half ago, Thierry Baudet went on one of his shows, and Thierry said, well, when we were young, we had as our hero Ronald Reagan, and now surely our only hero can be Vladimir Putin. And he talked about an online nervous breakdown. Well, Seb Gorka went absolutely apoplectic.
Well, and I remember him from 1999 when I was still living in Budapest. I think he just arrived back there. By the way, the Gray Zone has a very, very good expose on him. He had hoped for a high position in the first Orban government, and it turns out he couldn't because he couldn't get a security clearance from the Hungarian government because of his spy work in the British government. Apparently, in my several meetings with him, always felt it was very curiously hyped. You don't usually, those who tell don't know, those who know don't tell. He was always very public about his intelligence ties when I met him in 1999. Anyway, so not to drag it out, but very disappointing. I don't know what he has in mind. I know he likes people around him. He likes to shake the scorpion in a bottle. I would be hoping that there would be good scorpions and bad scorpions in the jar. But at least from what I can see right now, I can only see bad scorpions. Marco Rubio, the stupidest man, second stupidest man in American politics after Lindsey Graham, and now as our Secretary of State. It's almost
Daniel, you would have thought, and maybe it's still going to happen. Your sentiments are exactly mine. I'm very, very disappointed. I'm distraught. But where's the one person that can, we need a court gesture. We need somebody, we need like a McGregor in there to say, are you guys out of your mind? Really? I mean, that would be saving grace here. Where's the other opinion? I mean, we had that, like Adlai Stevenson around John F. Kennedy saying, no, I mean, he was alone, but there was a point of debate. Okay, there's none of that here. What I see is different levels of Israeli firsters, is what I see.
That's the common tie between everyone. Yeah. If you look, you don't even have to scratch very deeply below the surface to see that their alliance, ironically, for an America First administration, ironically, their allegiance is not to America First.
Catherine, is that your view as well? I mean, I suppose we can't really be surprised by the Israeli dimension, because after all, to be fair, Daniel, I'm sure you'll agree with me, Trump never made any secret of his very muscular support for Israel, which of course crosses both, as we know, crosses all sides. Catherine, do you share Daniel's view? And if you do, how do we understand it? I mean, if I would say something, I'm going to say something very stupid as to be devil's advocate, but in the British parliamentary system, you have to please all sides of the parliamentary party. So, you have to have lefties and righties if you've got a conservative government or whatever. But of course, that parliamentary logic doesn't apply in the American system. What's your view, Catherine?
So my impression, John, and many of the appointees are not people I know well, but my impression is that Trump really felt in his first presidency that he recruited people who had great gravitas individually, but didn't work as a team. Mm-hmm. And what he's trying to do is bring in now this time people he is, he knows personally, he feels comfortable with. I agree with you. He's trying to satisfy a lot of different coalitions, but he wants people who, when he say jump, will say how high and will work as a team. And he wants a group of people who are much more comfortable with business. So if you look at the net worth of sort of the whole team he's bringing in, it's extraordinarily high for any historical cabinet. And I agree absolutely. I think the team certainly does look like Israel first. If we if I was a tyrant, the first rule I would institute is no dual citizen passports, without a special waiver and without full disclosure, including of all financial holdings. And I think if we were to institute that rule, you might see this cabinet empty out.
But sorry, are you saying, Catherine, that we have dual citizens then in the new administration?
I think we either have a fair amount of dual citizens, or we have very significant conflicts of interest between their personal finances and their personal financial interests and the position they're going to hold. So one thing I would love to see the media do a lot of is really diving into what their personal financial interests are and how they relate to the policies that are being proposed. So I would call this team first and foremost, plunder worthy.
But if it's Israel first, then presumably it's Russia second. And we all share an interest in Russia, the Ukraine war, and so on. We're all, of course, interested in the Israeli situation too, as human beings. But I know Peter and I and Daniel, obviously, to some extent, we all have a strong interest in the Russia thing. Can we conclude that it's Israel first and Ukraine second? What do you think? Or Catherine? Go ahead, Catherine.
I don't think we know, because it seems pretty. I don't know if you realize this, but early this summer, the Foreign Affairs published an article on why Trump and his foreign policy team were attractive in many ways. And from that moment on, I believe that Trump had a fair amount of support from the Republican establishment. This time around, they weren't going to oppose him. They were going to use him. And one reason is, if you look at their accomplishment or their desires in terms of building a real financial control grid, I think they think Trump is somebody who can deliver that. And that's my chief concern about him. And of course, that would be in alignment with Israel first. Now, how he's going to pivot on the situation in Ukraine, I think is a big question mark. And if the Republican establishment is behind him, then what is it that they really think they can be accomplished? I've never seen a pathway to victory for the NATO in the Ukraine, and I haven't seen it since 2014. I still don't see it. But how you wiggle your way out of this one, that is a very big question.
So, Daniel, we understand the disappointments, but what about the upside? Tulsi Gabbard and Robert Kennedy, how do they weigh in the balance? Are they outweighed?
They're not going to pass muster. They're going to be both shot down. I'm sorry, Daniel.
No, go ahead, Peter.
You mean they won't be approved? You mean they won't be approved?
I can't see how they can make it to the confirmation process at all. Okay. Robert F. Kennedy, he's very complicated. I actually like a lot of things that Robert F. Kennedy has to say, except for his stand on Israel-Palestine. But he doesn't have the gravitas with these people whatsoever. First of all, the Democrats, he's a turncoat, number one. And he's an interloper for a lot of other Republicans. Tulsi Gabbard, it's wall-to-wall propaganda against her right now. MSNBC has found life again, okay? They're just going hour after hour after hour going against her. Now, not that that's a very small segment of the population that watches it, but they have influence. The MSNBC is a tiny operation that attracts people in power because it's an echo chamber, okay? There's no way in the world that she can get through things. I have a question for you, Daniel. Matt Gaetz. Where's Trump? Where is he? He didn't go to bat for him. He won't go to bat for Robert F. Kennedy. He won't go to bat for Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, actually, Peter, which is that the biggest disappointment was the rise and fall of Matt Gaetz, who someone I don't know personally, but good friends of mine know him well personally, and apparently is even better than his public persona in terms of all these issues that we're concerned about. Someone who I think could have led the Department of Justice into actually considering doing some justice, and his fall was incredible, particularly when you consider the consequence or the circumstances around his fall and these alleged personal dealings he had. Let's put it that way, many years ago, which if you spend any amount of time around Capitol Hill, what he's accused of doing is pretty small potatoes. That's pretty much. We saw what they were doing. We saw what they were doing in the Senate chamber. That's not an anomaly. Let's put it that way. I spent 13 years there, so that is an enormous disappointment. His fall has been so precipitous that I wonder how much more there is. Who is blackmailing him? Sadly enough, he's gone from someone who would have been an extraordinarily an historic attorney general to someone who's selling his voice to do greeting cards on the internet, and that is I don't know that I've ever seen a fall that bad. Who is this fellow?
Daniel, I don't know if you saw it, and I suggest that we maybe even put in the link later. Is Jimmy Dore, someone that I really admire and like. He did an entire expose on the entire backstory of what's around Matt Gaetz. He's I think it was published yesterday. Things I didn't even know, and I'd been following it pretty closely. This was a sophisticated operation to destroy him. It's really extraordinary. I'll send Vince the link, and we can put it at the bottom here. It's really insightful.
Yeah, and actually,
sorry, go on.
I would just say, just to finish up on him, also Ryan Dawson, a friend of mine, did an absolutely excellent, real breakdown of what happened. And you're right, Peter. If I haven't seen Jimmy Dore's, but if it's anything like Ryan's, it has to do with family wealth. It has to do with his father. It has to do with blackmail. It has to do with all sorts of extremely shady things. So there's a lot more to the story than meets the eye.
Bhattacharya was nominated by Trump as the director of the NIH. That's a pretty good appointment.
That's probably maybe his best.
And he'll make it through confirmation.
You think so?
Yeah.
I think so. Because there are so many people across the political spectrum that is so disgusted by what the COVID protocols did. I mean, you know, when you think about the 2024 election, very few people point out it's the first post-COVID election, and people voted on that. Okay, and in the swing states, they voted on that. Okay, it wasn't a bumper sticker at the time, but I think when in retrospect we'll see people voted on that, and I think Bhattacharya is an exemplary pick. Exemplary.
I mean,
There
Trump
is a concern.
Oh, sorry.
No, go on.
I was just going to say Trump is famous for not being able to admit mistakes in the past. I sort of take this as kind of an implicit apology to America by bringing in Bhattacharya.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say something that concerns me, and maybe Catherine can comment on this, is what appears to be a carbon economy. I think Whitney Webb has labeled it as such. I mean, you've got Elon Musk, who's right next to Trump. Elon openly pushes carbon reduction, carbon taxes, the renewable industry, and I'm a bit nervous that Trump is going to usher in the sustainable development agenda right under everybody's noses without them even noticing. Catherine, what do you think?
So I would say it this way. I'm very concerned that the next push is to build the control grid. So we've seen Trump make statements very supportive of a digital ID. In some context as a solution to election fraud, in some context as a solution to immigration, which sells, but it's patently ridiculous. But it's an excuse for a digital ID. And we're looking at the effort by Musk and Vivek, interestingly named Doge, which has enormous historical context. But basically, my read of what they're saying is they're looking to swap the civil service, which essentially reports to Congress and tries to follow written orders, swap it for big tech. And you see lots of criticism of big ag, big pharma, but none of big tech. And of course, if you literally install, the rise of the deep state has paralleled the rise of corporate contractors and large banks running the entire government operation. And if you use this effort to wipe out the civil service, then you are in a position where the intelligence agencies and the central banks run the government, not Congress or the people's representatives. And that's when you get almost a complete exercise of control by the central banks and the banking system, not just a monetary policy, but a fiscal policy as well. So that's very concerning. The question is, do they want the third leg of the control grid is going to be an all digital monetary system. Now, Trump has been very clear he's not in support of a CBDC. But if you look at the noises that he and some of his for example, his Commerce Secretary is making, they're very supportive of a private crypto solution, which could be even worse. The Fed still has obligations to Congress and obligations for transparency. The equivalent of a private all-digital monetary system would be far darker and far worse. So I'm very nervous about where they're going on all the different legs of the control stool. And when you add, Musk tweeted out, I think in February, his full support for a carbon credit tax scheme. If you add that, then we are looking at all the different things that need to be put in position to achieve operationally the vision of it's 2030 and you have no assets.
So during the campaign, Thierry Baudet, the leader of Forum for Democracy, I hope I'm not committing an indiscretion, on our sort of group chat for the parliamentary group, he said, everyone of course was rooting for Trump, and he said, no, I hope Trump loses, because if he wins, it'll be false hope, and everyone will yet again be disappointed. And it sounds to me like that was a very prophetic remark, because Catherine, what you're saying is that not only has the deep state managed to prevail in terms of appointments, so we're disappointed, but that it's actually going to be on speed now, even under this new administration. So what is up? Is this whole thing just a fraud?
So
How do I understand it? When I
my
say this whole
concern-
thing, I mean Trump's whole persona.
Well, my concern was as soon as I saw the support coming from the sort of Northeast Republican establishment, I said, uh-oh, they know the Biden administration can't get the control grid for them. Maybe they'll use Trump. But at the same time, what I have to say, if you look at the extraordinary situation that the dollar system and the finances are in, what I was expecting, no matter who would get voted on, that this policy fight, both, what people are going into the positions and the policy fight, this is going to be trench warfare. It's been in the United States. So I've been working with state legislators and state officials on trying to sort of put into place the infrastructure legally and financially for financial freedom. But if you look at this fight for central control versus freedom, it's going on in America. David Hughes calls it omni-war. This is trench warfare every day, all day long, issue by issue. And I think it's going to be the same in the Trump administration. And no matter who went in, it's going to be fought out at the nuts and bolts level.
Yeah, in other words, so it's not the elected official, the elected president who decides, but instead the apparatus, the deep state. What do you mean, Catherine, by Northeast Republicans?
So really the group in the Council on Foreign Relations, the group are basically that's traditionally the group around the financial system in New York. But I would say it this way. If you look at the US economy and you break it down to 3,100 states, every state, every county, 3,100 counties is dependent on organized crime and war. We have a deep financial dependence. And as the federal government, at this point, John, we really are a Soviet economy in the United States because the federal government has steadily encroached on independent income. The pandemic was very successful at shifting more market share out of independent income into the publicly traded corporations. And so we've seen the steady increase in dependency of everything running through the federal government. And the federal government then depended on getting the debt model to extract a tithe globally. And as that tithe, and the BRICS has made it very clear they're going to do everything they can to reduce the tithe. And as that tithe reduces, it's a game of musical chair. Are they going to go to war? Are they going to cut the subsidy to the American people and their sort of allies? So this is a really deep economic issue, and there's no way the president of the United States can walk into the Oval Office and turn the machinery unless there's bottom-up support to turn the machinery.
And he doesn't have that, or he's not.
Well, I have a question for Daniel. This may sound really an outlier of view, but I think the goal of Trump was just to win. He's done. I think he really, because where is he now? He's gone very silent. I mean, he's achieved what he wanted to do. He won in 2016. He believes he won in 2020. He might have, and he's won a third time. So he's on the pantheon in history, the greatest political comeback in presidential politics. He's satisfied. He's done. I really feel that. Daniel, what do you think?
That would be great if it were true, and he could just sit on his laurels and he could give cool speeches. And
he might just do that. Yeah. He just might do that.
Catherine made a point that I think is important, which is the this sort of Doge movement, the government efficiency movement, is I think it has promise. And as you may have heard, Dr. Paul has been cordially invited by Musk and Ramaswamy. Now we don't know Musk personally, but we've had Ramaswamy on our show a couple of times to participate in it. But I think the warning sign that Catherine points out is relevant, and it's not only in the financial sphere. We recently published a paper for military reform written by a good friend of ours, Colonel Doug McGregor, and he makes a point about, and I'm not a military expert, so I'll just sort of cover the basics, which is that we have too many 4-stars, we have too many commands, military commands. They're enormously expensive, and they harm us. So he makes a very solid argument for simply reducing the number of 4-stars, the number of commands that we have, because we don't need them. And you could look at that throughout government if you're talking about getting rid of civil servants. But what he has pointed out, I think, in several interviews, there is a danger that in the name of government efficiency, there will be more of a qualitative rather than quantitative reduction of people, i.e., going into the military and cutting out all the woke people, or all the people who I don't like, or all the people who were against me, or what have you. That's a real danger, I think, because if you start doing that sort of loyalty-based cutting, then you do have a problem, because you do have more of a centralization of power. I'm the first one who would say that we need to have about 1/10 of the civil servants that we have, and there are whole departments that should be gone, including the Department of Education, which is relatively new invention that we don't need. However, when you start doing it qualitatively and reducing people who are not loyal to you personally, you do have a danger of the concentration of power. And so I think that's something. This is. I still have some hope for this administration, but let's not kid ourselves. This is not a libertarian administration by any stretch.
Catherine, I'm fascinated by what you were saying. So do elections change anything? I mean, it just seems like, maybe, an individual can, if we use like the aircraft carrier model, you could turn it 1 or 2 degrees and you're changing course, but fundamentally you're going in the same direction. The question is, does this kabuki theater that we go through every 4 years, is it just that?
So, Paula, I think elections do matter, because there are times in America when we all get together and we talk about important issues. And they bring transparency and they bring discussion, which can be very healthy. And I've found, particularly at the state and local level, elections can be very real and very important. And I do think that there are positive aspects about the Trump victory. If you look worldwide at what is going on, there was no way. I think a lot of the world finds American culture at this point to be deeply offensive, even repulsive. And I think there's a wonderful article in the Wall Street Journal about how Trump won the manosphere. And I think part of what is happening here is a push to rebalance to a culture that believes in the family, that believes in not, trafficking children, that is a rejection of a deeply perverse strain in American culture and politics that, most people in America find revolting, but many people around the world find revolting. And if you're going to make some real progress here on some of the issues internationally, I think you need a different kind of culture. And it's hard for anybody who lived in New York as long as I did to believe that I'm saying that Trump is returning our culture to something healthier, but it's true.
Yeah, but that's like the base and the superstructure. I mean, you can, given what we've discussed here, I mean, then it's the culture wars that people vote on, because the nature of our financial system and its connections to big tech and whatnot, that can stay the same. I mean, it's no surprise that major corporations gave monies to Black Lives Matter. We're woke, we're socially active, but don't look any closer at us, because we're vacuuming up all of the excess income of the middle class. I mean, that's one of the things that's always bothered me. I would like to see. I agree with, I think, everybody on the panel. I mean, I find most of Western culture disgusting right now, but it's a point to talk about, isn't it? And I think that's intentional in many ways.
Well, but here's the thing, Peter. I think what everybody on this panel wants, and everybody listening, what we all want is to be free. And
Yes.
we want to live in a world where there is a rule of law and we can count on the rule of law. And the reality is that how do we get the economics in alignment with that? So I'll give you a great example. In the United States, as you know, one of the great benefits to our rule of law is that the states have, under the Constitution, extraordinary powers, and no power not delegated to the federal government is reserved to the states. And that gives us an incredible opportunity to slow down or prevent the encroachment of central control. So there's some wonderful legislators in the north of Idaho and real freedom fighters. And I was meeting with one of them, and he said, our problem is we send $1 to Washington every year, and then we get $1.19 back. And every time I try and enforce the Constitution and fight for the Constitution, my constituents say, I want the 19 cents. So there was a group of legislators, for example, in Tennessee last year that got together and very quietly tried to come up with a way that Tennessee could not take the education money from the federal government. Because let's face it, the education money requires us to teach our children how to be sex slaves. It's absurd. And yet they couldn't figure out a way to just walk away from the money. Now, my attitude is, let's walk away from the money. At some point you have to decide, do you want, more debased money, or do you want law? And if there's no law, then ultimately the money won't be worth anything anyway. But if you look at the multiple personality disorder about the economics in the American culture, it's very deep. And my biggest concern about this administration is basically what you're looking at is a wave of people ready to plunder the remaining assets. So the federal government has not obeyed the financial management laws, have been very significantly operating outside the financial management law since 1998. There's $21 trillion missing from federal accounts as of 2015. And Trump in 2018 with FASB 56 basically adopted and promulgated an administrative policy that says the federal government doesn't have to publish, open financial disclosure, and basically can keep secret books. And we've had secret books, since then. And if you add that with the classification and national security laws, all the corporations and large banks doing business with government can also have secret books. So we're in a state of a complete financial coup. Now, as the co-chair of the transition committee and the transition team, and now the nominee for Secretary of Commerce said, don't worry about the debt. We have 36 trillion of debt, but we have 500 trillion of land and assets. And if you look at some of the proposals to privatize or monetize those assets, and some of the proposals to basically, get the government engaged in a Ponzi scheme with Bitcoin, they're the most frightening financial proposals I have ever seen in my life.
Well, at least you could say they think big. They're thinking big.
They think very big, and which is why, we have at the Solari Report, we've done a series this year on plunder capitalism. And plunder capitalism by the private equity firms is a very serious problem. And when you combine that with federal finances outside the law and a balance sheet that does have $500 trillion of assets to be plundered, my number one concern here is, are we looking at a team? It's not just Israel first, it's plunder first.
Okay, Catherine, something that I've been trying to wrap my head around is the idea of that debt ceiling. 10 years ago, we were talking about the massive amounts of debt. And 15 years ago, we were talking about the massive amounts of debt. But if the Fed or the US government just keeps printing money and the debt ceiling keeps rising, does any of it matter?
So it matters because if you look at who's going to buy the debt and how the debt's organized, let's just step out for a second. The only reason we have a lot of debt is because we have a debt-based currency. So you don't need a debt-based currency. The Treasury could just issue the currency without debt. And so in one sense, the $36 trillion is a scam. But let's look at how the $36 trillion works. Okay, so the primary dealers, of which Howard Lutkin, nominee for Secretary of Commerce, is one of the head primary dealers. The primary dealers issue Treasury debt, and that Treasury debt goes into a variety of places. But one of the places it goes, the big places it goes, is the retirement savings and the pension funds of the American people and people all around the world. And then that money goes to Treasury. And given what we know about the secret books and the money missing from the Treasury that we know of, that money then disappears out the back door. So the real balance sheet is radically different than what we're being shown publicly, and nobody knows what that is. Now, what I would call that is a coup, and that coup's been going on for a long time. And as I said, everything that's been sort of moved out through the primary dealer and Treasury system has probably been moved out particularly if you include the 23 trillion that went out on the bailouts. So what is left is the assets, the land, the mineral resources. I would point out that in 2018 under Trump, when they did FASB 56, they also ordered a new geological survey by the government geological survey, whereby all of the resources, mineral resources from, I think, ground level down to 3,000 be done. And they've been doing that ever since 2018. And part of that is if you look at the danger that the empire has to sort of recede back into North America, where are they going to get the lithium? Where are they going to get the mineral resources? Where are they going to get the land? So, and that's part of it. But again, if I was doing reform, the first thing I would do if I landed in the White House is say, okay, where's the $21 trillion and how do we get it back? There's been a bank robbery, but they're not talking about that. They're talking about how valuable the land is, and that makes me very nervous.
But we know how to get the money back. Lindsey Graham told us it's in Ukraine.
That's what I was going to say.
We just have to win there. Scrape
And the
up all that
lithium.
delicious
Lithium
lithium.
and the land.
Well, Daniel, I'm sure you all remember that they made the same argument about Afghanistan, why we shouldn't leave it. Remember? Yeah.
Absolutely. And actually, in our program yesterday, I read all of the quotes from the neocons arguing why we need to go into Iraq in 2003, because the whole thing would pay for itself and then some. This is easy. It's not
well, but it's
going to cost a couple bucks.
Daniel, my latest report, and correct me if I'm wrong, my latest report is that the oil revenues from Iraq are still being deposited in the New York Fed.
I'm sure you're right, and then, we're also stealing a little bit from Syria and elsewhere.
Right.
It's funny because one of the things I mentioned on the program is, the historic criticism of the left of U.S. foreign policy is that it's an imperialist foreign policy. And those of us not on the left, sort of poo-pooed the idea, but it actually literally is it's literally mid-19th century imperialism that we go to these places and steal their stuff and kill their people. We're basically,
and then you get the American taxpayer to do reconstruction, and then you do it all over again.
Yeah, spin cycle, exactly.
Catherine, what you're saying is absolutely fascinating. Is it sustainable? I mean, it's a Ponzi scheme. That's not sustainable.
So here's in the 90s, after I left, I worked at HUD I was assistant secretary of housing at HUD. When I left, I started a company, and we were very excited about relational database technology. And we took all the federal credit and appropriation and tax collection data and put it in databases and looked at it with GIS software on a place-based basis so that we could essentially produce the federal budget, county by county, state by state. And so we did a lot of simulation on what would be possible if instead of spending money for political control, we spent it to optimize economic performance. So, for example, I used to find neighborhoods where HUD was spending $250,000 to build public housing, a unit of public housing, where $50,000 would buy and rehab a single-family home from the FHA foreclosure portfolio. And so literally within one neighborhood, if we could just shift money between line items in the budget, we could get 4 or 5 homes for the price of one. And I took my analysis and showed city after city where this was true to the special assistant of the guy who ran that program. And she got very angry and said, but if we did that, how could we generate fees for our friends? So anyway, so the money has been spent over many, many decades to assert central control and sort of for political reasons, instead of for any kind of economic optimization. And part of the problem that you're looking at in Washington is we've seen decade after decade of people rising because of their political skills in this central bureaucracy or central economy and again, very Soviet, as opposed to any kind of economic performance. And so what I will tell you, having simulated that, is the wealth potential, particularly with the blessings of new technology, is potentially explosive because I have no words to express how expensive tyranny is and how much the U.S. economy and society and culture is struggling under tyranny. I mean, the tyranny is very subtle. It's very invisible in many ways. Just the mind control, just the propaganda. All of these control techniques are unbelievably expensive and unbelievably wasteful of everything from the human spirit to our money. So could things be turned around economically? Yes, but not with this kind of central control. And that has, I mean, this is really the top of the central banking chain against everybody else. And the guys at the top don't trust the bottom to take responsibility. And the people at the bottom have been poisoned. And at this point, are not making a whole lot of sense. So I would say it's a very brutal struggle on the ground economically for whether or not we're going to be centrally controlled. And that's why freedom has to win. Because if you look at the alternative of where this is going with new technology, I mean, we're either talking about freedom or slavery, and there's no middle of the road left. And so, what I can tell you is that if for some reason we could get freedom, we could be very, very wealthy.
Can I go back to something that you said, Catherine, and you, Peter? Two things. Firstly, Catherine, you said that this was the victory of the manosphere. In other words, if I've understood you correctly, of masculinity over femininity or effeminacy. Is that what you meant?
No, not really, because I would say in the culture that the manosphere sort of was rejecting, women can't be women. They can get beat up in a ring or beaten at swimming by somebody who's pretending to be a woman. It's so it's really traditional values against
Yes.
perversion.
Yes,
so to
but
speak.
I surely that is a source of hope, because I certainly believe that politics is downstream of culture, and if Trump, as he has promised, is going to revoke all the wokeism, passing laws about two genders, and obviously in his very being embodying, and I think that's what you were suggesting, embodying, a certain set of principles. Surely that is a source of encouragement.
Huge
Added to which, and here I want to come back to something
Yeah.
that Peter said, because Peter, you said Trump has won and that's it now. He doesn't need to do anything else. But surely that's not in Trump's character. He's not going to sit back and be like Emmanuel Macron and just fulfill a ceremonial role. That's surely completely the opposite of his character. He will surely want to be hands-on. And is that not better than this flying on autopilot, which we've had under Biden and Harris?
Well, I mean, just a quick reaction. I agree with you, and I hope that's not the case. But ever since the election, Trump is not top of mind. It's his picks. It's not what he says. It's not how he's reacting to things. There's a lot going on in the world right now, and a lot of people want to see an alternative. They may not like Trump and they may not trust him, but he's certainly not Biden-Harris. And I think that's what initiated that thought in my mind, is that he's achieved something that is quite remarkable, even for Donald Trump, for history. That's because of his relative silence and inaction. He could appeal on public in social media, because we have the Logan Act in the United States, which it's a useless thing, but you can be afraid of it. To kind of chime in about the massive, complicated problems that his administration is going to inherit. Maybe that is still coming, but I agree with you. I mean, the manosphere is on top again. But again, it's not just a cultural thing that is divorced from economic realities. I think what Catherine is saying is, I think what we're both saying.
I think it's very connected to. So let me grossly oversimplify just to make a point. We have two models. So the Democratic model makes their money from shuffling paper around and making movies. And Donald Trump makes his money by building properties and managing those properties. And any property owner will tell you, you can't let crime get going around your property or it will destroy the value of your property. He associates crime with losing money and losing wealth. Whereas, if you're media or pushing paper around, you can make a lot of money from perversion. So he's got a very different economic model in his head. And he comes out of the New York community, which is very open and very boisterous and very entrepreneurial. And one of his great strengths is he loves transparency. The generals would always get mad at him because he wanted to talk about the great weapons. Shut up. Don't talk about the rod of God. Anyway, so I think this notion of, a very masculine man who wants to protect his property and not let those kinds of things go on his turf is a very, very positive aspect of Donald Trump.
Fascinating.
If I can actually pour a little bit of cold water on previously we talked about the destruction of woke and how hopefully this will happen under Trump. Now Catherine has thoroughly depressed me now, even worse.
Oh, no.
I don't know what to do. I mean, I'm going to jump out the window, but I'm on the first floor. But nevertheless, the point I would make is that I think there will be a certain aspect of woke that will be defeated. And hopefully this gender nonsense will, as you point out, men beating up women is somehow acceptable. But my concern is that the right is very much as woke as the left, and the right has its own woke ideology. Our incoming Attorney General, now that Matt Gaetz is defeated, is on the record saying that people who protested in the colleges against Israel's slaughter in Palestine should be deported, should be sent out of the country, and she didn't. And Trump himself has talked about that. So the woke on the right is you can't talk about certain things. Like the woke on the left, you can't talk about transgender. The woke on the right, you can't talk about things like Israel and other things, or you'll be canceled just as much as you're canceled on the left. So what we have is these two competing sort of totalitarian ideologies, and the rest of us, as Catherine points out very well, are squeezed in the middle, increasingly squeezed in the middle.
When a new regime takes power, Catherine, you mentioned a coup, but traditionally in the sort of caricature, as soon as there's a coup, a new regime takes power, the first thing that they seize is the radio station. Is there not any hope in what Trump has said about free speech? Because he gave in one of his video addresses a very comprehensive list of things that he would do, cutting government funding to the censoro industrial complex, as some people call it. His video address was more or less written, I'm sure, by Mike Pence. Is that not a key thing? I mean, if free speech is liberated after 8 years now of censorship?
So I hope it happens. We've seen movement at in the Missouri versus Biden case of the Supreme Court not being as strong on First Amendment as we all had hoped.
Oh.
So clearly, we hope that Trump, and again, he's always been, other than FASB 56 in the money on many policy issues, he's been very much appearing like a free speecher. But again, I think the pressures are going to be on the other way, and I don't know which way it's going to come out. We just have to see. I do think I just want to mention, Peter, I do think given what Trump is dealing with in shutting down lawsuits and dealing with interference with his personal business in an outrageous and lawless way by the courts, I do think he has the court cases to finish working through, and will be much more careful about what he says before he goes into office. So I think his relative quietude is simply him being,
That's a good point.
He's being prudent, and in a way that if I were in his shoes, he's saying more than I would say if I was in his shoes doing the same thing.
Can I make one comment on this? And this is a positive comment. I think another potential bright light with regard to free speech is not necessarily in the executive branch, but the Republicans have expanded their control in the Senate. Now they will control the Senate. Now the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee is will be none other than Senator Rand Paul. And Senator Paul put out a statement, I think it was yesterday. He was on a show, I believe it was, but he explicitly pointed out that he is going to go after the censorship industrial complex. That's one of his top priorities. That and also the COVID stuff that he's been great on. He's gonna go after these people, but he's gonna go after the corporate censors. So I think that is a very, very positive move because I do have a lot of faith in him in that particular area.
You know, that's an excellent point because a few excellent Republican senators and House leaders can make an enormous difference. And what we've seen is really good governors and legislators and treasurers and AGs all over the country who really believe that in many practical ways they will be much better with a Republican landslide, you know, House, Senate, and White House. So, you know, I think there are a lot of people like Senator Paul who are, you know, are going to be a mighty force over the next 4 years.
Daniel, when Trump came to power in January 2017, he had Mike Pence as his sidekick, his direct connection to the legislator, to the Senate. Is Trump better poised this time round with majorities in both houses to get his legislative agenda kickstarted and fast? Because he didn't have the knowledge, he wasn't equipped because of his lack of political experience. We know when a president comes in, it's going to be 18 months. That's what you got. You got 18 months. You got both houses. And I'm proposing metaphorically, of course, this is a public forum, but I'm calling for a coup, okay? But a coup where an agenda is legislatively and transparently passed into law. Do you think he's better situated this time around?
I think certainly in the House he is. I mean, he and Johnson seem to click. I have very little faith in Johnson, by the way, but they seem to click. I think the Senate has always been very hostile to Donald Trump, and I think it remains that way. And I think I think that's why we'll see some difficult. John Thune is no friend of Donald Trump. John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, actually hates Donald Trump. He really is another Mitch McConnell, so that could be a problem. But he does come in with an enormous mandate, with a popular vote and the electoral college vote. So I think that will carry him. But I think in the House it'll be easier, which is more important anyway, because the money bills start there as well. So I think, unfortunately, I don't see that the House Republicans have an agenda that we've seen in the past. I don't know what they're going to pursue, and I don't think they know what they're going to pursue. But I think you'll certainly have an easier go of it in the House.
Is the GOP the party of Trump now? I mean, we all remember Lyndon Baines Johnson, and he did the what was the term? He did the Johnson effect, was it? Okay. I mean, he could pressure people. He won a landslide in '64, and he made it very clear to both houses, you're going to do exactly what I say. Trump needs to show that there's not that I disagree with MAGA, but that's what he represents. It's not in the cabinet. Is it going to be in the Congress? Or is this just all kabuki theater?
Well, I just quickly, I just think that we can always sort of have a debt of gratitude to Joe Biden because we're so sick of this guy. We're so sick of Kamala Harris.
He brought us together. He brought us all together.
Yeah, so I think the House probably feels the same way. Okay, you got us. Let us do what you want because we don't want this stuff back.
Yeah, I mean, the defeat of the other side is surely in itself a cause for optimism. I come back to the point about the radio station. I'm sure you've all seen the clip where Hillary Clinton said, "If we don't control social media, we lose total control. If we don't moderate social media, we lose total control." Well, they have lost total control, and that surely is absolutely immense. Assuming, which I think we can assume with Elon Musk, that it will go through.
Can I just bring up one thing that happened to me during the election that gives me it was very inspiring. Dennis Kucinich ran as an independent in Ohio's 7th district and has a wonderful team of people behind him, small but wonderful, and of course didn't win as an independent. But they did a survey of the 18-year-old to 25-year-old voters registered in Ohio's 7th. And what they discovered was 4% registered as Democrat and 4% registered as Republican and 92% registered as independent. And that tells you that very real change is coming.
There is a, a lesser spoken point, but there are some positive changes that nobody really cares about, but that are nevertheless there. I don't know if you remember in 2020, Trump passed the bill, I've got it here in front of me, the Executive Order on Promoting Beautiful Federal Civic Architecture. In other words, any public building that is over a certain value has to be built in a certain traditional style. That's actually quite lovely.
Yeah.
I hope he does more of that.
Well, again, that's one of,
Aesthetics are very, very important.
it's one of FD's big campaigns is against hideous, brutalist modern architecture. Germ, that's a great point to finish on, and I don't think it is a detail at all. I think that we make our buildings and then our buildings make us. So well done, you've put the hat on. We can now see your true colours. Excellent. Well, listen, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Daniel, Peter, and Germ. Thank you very much indeed. And let's why don't we redo this? Say I don't know, in 6 months' time. Let's reconvene and see whether our worst fears have been confirmed. As I'm sure, as good pessimists, we are all convinced they will be. Thank you all very much.
We're willing for things to work, and I think we just pray that the Trump administration turn out to be great success for freedom.
Exactly.
Just pray.
Very good. Thank you, everyone, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again next week at the same time. All the best. Bye.
Thank you.